So this is where we left off in the last video. This is the plan of the Great Mosque in Kieroran, Tunisia, 836 through 875. And it's built of stone. They have sturdy buttresses on the walls, and it is quite square in profile. Although I think it's a little bit more rectangular. And it has entrances on the east and west that leads into an arcaded forecourt that resembles a Roman forum. So I believe these might be the entrances here on the east and the west. And it is oriented to the north-south axis. And the mosque's minaret, which is number 8, where's that at? Right here. And the two domes of the Hypostyle prayer hall, which are number 4. Here we go. And then, so the first dome is number 6, right here, where the entrance dome is over the entrance bay, and the second, number 3, is the Mirab Dome, and it's over the bay that the Mirab is located in, and the Mirab is number 2, right here. And it's set into the Qibla wall, which is number 1. So this is the Qibla wall. This is the Mirab here, the Mirab Dome, the Hypostyle prayer hall where a lot of people would stand. 5 is a nave, or basically an aisle. 6 is the entrance dome area. This would have a dome over it. And these two domes kind of serve to show worshippers where the Qibla wall is, which is facing Mecca always. So that's kind of the layout of the mosque. And a lot of mosques have these same features in them. They might have slightly different arrangements, but basically most of them have all of these different different pieces to them. And the minaret are the towers. This one only has one. The one in Tunisia, the mosque in Tunisia. And the architecture of the mosque is actually closely related to how Muslims pray. The Quran lays out that Muslims must pray 5 times a day, and this can be done on one's own, but Muslims actually prefer, in a lot of times, to pray together. So although their religion doesn't require any kind of third party, so to speak, the Islamic religion takes place between the person and their God, typically. So there's no direct need for a church or a priest or anything like that, which is kind of cool. Unlike Christianity or Catholicism, for example, is pretty much requires the presence of priests in the church. So that's how Islam is a little bit different. The Qibla wall is the wall that's the direction towards Mecca, and Muslims must face that while praying, and this is obviously important to them. The Muslim Sabbath is on Friday, and in the earliest times they would gather at Muhammad's house, and his house was quite large, and it had a square court with rows of palm trunks supporting a thatched roof. And at the southern side, which faced Mecca, there was it was much wider and had a double row of trunks, and after prayer, the imam, or the leader of the collective worship, stood in a stepped pulpit or minbar set up in the southern Qibla. So the minbar is typically in the Qibla wall, and all the worshipers face Mecca, and the imam, which is the leader of the sermon. And these features are pretty much standard in most mosque designs, like I said earlier. The word mosque in Arabic means place of prostration. And this is where they would gather for their daily 5 prayers. It's also referred to as the congregational mosque, and also called a Friday mosque, because they typically hold congregation on Fridays and not Sundays. So they're a little different. And Friday mosques are typically large enough to hold everyone in the settlement at once for the Friday at noon prayer. So instead of Sunday, Friday is kind of the day where they come together and pray, typically at least once a week, sometimes more, sometimes 5 times a day if they wanted to or if they had time. But at least I think they have to pray from home facing Mecca at the very least 5 times a day. And I think that's why these structures are so large, is because it was supposed to hold everyone in the settlement. Another important feature, like I said, is the Mirab. And it's a semicircular niche, usually set in the Qibla wall, and often a dome is in front of the Mirab to kind of help mark its position. And the niche is descended from the Greco-Roman architecture. And it was typically where the Greeks or the Romans would have placed a statue. So debate about the Mirab's origin, purpose, and meaning in Islamic architecture is ongoing, but many think may resemble the area where Muhammad stood at his house in Medina when he led the worship. In some mosques, a mascura precedes the Mirab, and the Mirab is down here. Sometimes a mascura precedes that, and the mascura is an area that's reserved for the ruler, and it can be quite elaborate, and many mosques feature at least one minaret, which are towers, used to call the faithful to worship. So typically from the minaret, there might be somebody that goes up there and calls out, or actually I went to Turkey and they had minarets on their worship, on their mosques, but they had speakers at the top of the minaret that would call worshipers to prayer. But back in the day, somebody would be up there yelling probably, or I'm not quite sure if they had any instruments that they would bring with them, but the minarets are also a good way to clearly signal that the structure is a mosque. So if you just move to town and you see that structure, you're going to say right away, oh, that's a mosque, because I see that really characteristic tower signaling that, hey, this building is now a mosque. Hypostyle halls are the area where, they would have a large roof held up by these many columns in the hypostyle hall areas, and there would be a roof over their heads. And very early feature in mosques, and later mosques might have 4 iwans, which are vaulted rectangular recesses on each side of the courtyard. And later mosques might have a central plan with a single large domed interior covered space, much like Byzantine churches. But today, there's many variations in the design and detail, but the mosques' features kind of remain unchanged. Well, there's one feature that remains unchanged, is that whatever their plan, it must, face Mecca, and they must worship facing the Qibla wall, which would be here. So that's the one thing that all mosques have in common, even though from early to later, is that they have that Qibla wall that faces Mecca. So here we have the Milwaya Minaret from the Great Mosque at Samara in Iraq from 848 to 852. And it's a 3-story minaret. And actually, it's more than 3 stories, sorry. It's basically kind of a spiral in form, and is at the capital of Samara. And it was the capital of the Abbasid Caliph al-Mutawakkil, I believe, al-Mutawakkil. And it was the largest ever mosque built at the time of its construction, the mosque at Samara. And this mosque covers a 4,500 square foot yard area, and it was built between 848 and 852, and it resembles a fortified city because the wall runs around its perimeter, and it features 44 semicircular towers. And this is the minaret that's pictured here. It's part of that structure, the Malwaya Minaret. Malwaya means snail shell in Arabic, and it is 65 feet tall, and it was originally linked to the mosque via a bridge, but now it stands alone. So the bridge is now missing, but still can see the snail shell-like appearance. And in order to keep each step of the snail shell form the same height, the steepness of the ramp actually increases the further you go up. And they did that because that's the only way they could keep it even, each step even. So it actually gets steeper the further up you go. And this minaret is actually too tall to be used with any effectiveness to call people in for prayer. So it's thought of to have built basically to signify the presence of Islam in the Tigris Valley where Samara is located. And it's kind of surrounded by a flat plain, so it's visible from quite a distance. So really it wasn't used as a minaret to actually call people into prayer because it's just too big. But it did signify the presence of Islam in the Tigris Valley where Samara and the Great Mosque at Samara was located. So we'll talk about Bakara, Mausoleum of the Salmonids in Bukhara, Uzbekistan, early 10th century. So the caliphs in Baghdad were the ultimate authority, but there were other rulers that ruled the eastern realms of the Abbasid Empire, and these rulers enjoyed considerable freedom and independence from the Western rulers. So the Samanids ruled over the frontier beyond the Oxus River on the border with India. So they're a little bit further towards India, further east. And they built this structure called the Mausoleum of the Samanids, and it's located in Bukhara, modern-day Uzbekistan in the early 10th century. And it's a mausoleum, which is a monumental tomb, and they're fairly rare in the early Islamic period, which is what we're covering right now. So this is a really fairly rare structure for its time period. And that's because Muhammad did not favor elaborate tombs. He wanted everybody to be buried in in a very plain way. So this kind of actually went away from his teachings to actually build mausoleums and elaborate tombs. And eventually, I guess even Muhammad's grave, they started to add walls onto it and then even a dome. This was well after his death, so definitely went against his original teachings. And elaborate tombs actually eventually became, very common for most caliphs. So this is one of the earliest preserved tombs in the Islamic world, and it's constructed of baked brick, and it's basically kind of a cube with a dome on the top. And it has slightly sloping sides, which is kind of unique. If you look at this, it's kind of hard to see, but if you look closely, you can kind of tell that the sides are sloping inward towards the dome slightly the further up you go, vertically on the building. And the brickwork has a lot of texture. It has a 3D pattern to it, and it's done by shaping and laying the bricks in a certain way to achieve that elaborate surface pattern and texture. And there are some gauge columns at the corners of the building. And there is a brick blind arcade, which is up here, basically a series of arches all the way around the building. This wraps all the way around the building. And inside the brick dome rests on an arcuated brick frame with engaged colonnettes. So this dome on cube form is definitely common in Islamic funerary architecture and Islamic architecture in general. So let's go on to Spain. We might have to finish this up in the next video. I think I'm going to start on this in the next video.